Welcome back to the Sports Marketeer. We're now just a few weeks out from the FIFA World Cup in the USA, Mexico and Canada. And as always, an enormous share of the world's attention is going to land on one team in particular, Brazil. Five-time champions, the most successful football nation on earth, the only country to have appeared at every World Cup since 1930, and a country whose footballing identity is arguably the most powerful brand in world sport. But it's also a country that hasn't won a World Cup in 24 years, whose last tournament on home soil ended in a 7-1 defeat. And they go into this summer under a foreign coach for the first time in their history. So this episode is not so much a tournament preview, it's a question about what this World Cup actually means to Brazil, to its identity, its culture, and to a generation of Brazilians who have never seen their heroes lift the trophy. And there's nobody better to answer those questions than my guest today, Tim Vickery, who's lived in Rio for nearly 30 years. He's the BBC's voice on South American football, a regular on World Service, ESPN Brazil, and his own Brazilian shirt name podcast with Dotun Adebayo. And his new book, Mundiales, A South American History of the World Cup, is co-written with Mark Biram and is out now via Pitch Publishing. It's an essential read. Tim, welcome to the Sports Marketeer. Let's start with the book. Tell me all about it.
Yes, co-written, which I think is important because South America, it's kind of divided into two halves. There's the Portuguese bit and the Spanish bit. The Pope divided it many, many centuries ago. The Spanish bit has obviously splintered into various nations. The Portuguese bit is Brazil. The two halves don't know each other particularly well. And so some books you read on South American football written by South Americans, they're good on one, not very good on the other. So we've got two voices. I've been in Brazil now, blimey, nearly 32 years on and off. Mark is a specialist in Hispanic studies, written a book on Colombia. So we've got both bases covered there, which is important. And I think we've got a terrific story to tell as well. I don't think it's fully appreciated the extent to which the World Cup is a South American creation. And together perhaps with France, who were a dominant force in FIFA in the early days. But without the South American contribution, I don't think the World Cup would have started until the late 50s. You know, we had our Copa America since 1916. The Euros didn't start until the late 50s. It's very much that Copa America and then a couple of Olympic triumphs by Uruguay in the 20s that lead to the start of the World Cup in 1930. So the South America is really where the World Cup starts. It's got the country Brazil, who've won it more times than anyone else, and it has the current champions. And it's the country that takes the World Cup most seriously, I think. And you can see that just by looking at the crowds. And that's not just Brazil and Argentina. That's just the massive travelling army of Colombia fans, the massive travelling army of Peru fans in Russia in 2018. It's where the World Cup lives with the drama turned up to 11. So they're the stories that we're looking to tell in our book, and I'm very, very happy with the way that it's turned out. It's a book because it's like one chapter on every World Cup. You can dip into it. You can dip into favourite World Cups and favourite chapters, but you can also sit back and you can see an arc emerging, a kind of arc of we're waiting for a Pelé to emerge. Pelé emerges. With Pelé and television, the World Cup is transformed into the global act of communion that gets us all together all around the planet for a month every 4 years. And then the years since Pelé, where it's almost as if the World Cup has always been trying to live up to the height of Mexico 70 and maybe touched it in Qatar last time round. So that's the book, Mundiales. Although I have a dog in this race, I would say go out and buy it because even when we launched it, I hadn't read it. You know what it is, Amar, as a journal. You finish the thing, press send, and on it goes. I hadn't actually read it when we launched it, reading it afterwards. There were times I caught myself thinking, "Blimey, this is good. This is good," and I would like to share this experience with as many people as possible.
Well, that's always a good feeling when you read it and think it's good, rather than why did I write that? It's great that you and Mark covered so many perspectives. He's a brilliant expert on countries like Colombia, for example, and you've got a really great holistic view of South American culture and how that comes alive every 4 years during the World Cup as well. So you've been in Rio for quite a while now. You've probably watched 2 or 3 generations of Brazilians come through. So where you're sat now, what does it feel like with the World Cup just a few weeks away? Give me a kind of a feeling of the mood of the nation right now.
The last time the World Cup was in the States, 1994, and again, 24 years without winning. And I remember one of the big English newspaper supplements, World Cup previews. The kind of main article piece was, if they don't win it this time, then their status as the country of football is going to be in jeopardy. And that's probably even more true this time around, because since that win, 2002, every campaign has ended when they've come up against a European side in the knockout stages. And it's over these last 24 years that European football seems to have gone on to another level in terms of the talent that it's now producing. And so if they don't win it next time, I mean, the fact they have a European coach, an Italian coach, is an acknowledgement of the primacy of the current primacy of European football, which they will hope to snatch back in the States. But if they don't, then maybe the stakes are even higher than they were going into USA 94.
We're going to talk about Ancelotti a bit later. We're going to talk a little bit about the hopes going into this tournament. What I wanted to do is go back a little bit, actually, and I know you love to go back as well. The shirt wasn't always yellow, was it?
No.
It was white until 1950. The Maracanazo, you write about it in the book, and you've spoken about it before. The redesign was literally a national trauma response, wasn't it?
Yeah, and this is always funny, I think, with every World Cup, Brazil is responding to what happened last time around, which is indicative of the importance of the tournament. And 50 is insane. They build the Maracanã as a place where they're going to win it. The two things go hand in hand. It is, just as if the English had built Nelson's column before the Battle of Trafalgar, and then say to Nelson, "We have built this column. Now we demand that you go out and do justice to it by beating the French." And so that it was a huge trauma not being able to do that. And so every time there's always a reaction, and sometimes it's logical, other times it's superstitious. And the idea of ditching the shirt was obviously entirely superstitious. And it's bizarre to believe that not so long before that yellow shirt becomes intrinsically linked with the idea of Brazil and the best football of the world, Brazil weren't even wearing it.
Yeah. Exactly, and now you've got the Seleção shirt. It's probably the most counterfeited, most photographed garments on the planet. I mean, iconic gets overused a lot, but it is literally iconic. Culturally, commercially, symbolically. Does Brazil own its own shirt anymore, or has the world taken it?
Well, there's a political dynamic in Brazil, because in the last few years, the far right have made it their thing. And I think they're going to get some pushback from it this time around. Some of this has to do with a certain US sportswear manufacturer. It's because the World Cups, as I remember them as a kid, and this is up to and including 94. The British fan, you didn't know the players before the tournament. And part of the fun of the tournament was getting to know the players during the course of the competition. By 98, that has changed because Nike have got involved. And there's a few things that have happened there. One is that an international agreed calendar comes in where clubs are obliged to release players on FIFA dates. So Nike can have Brazil then. That they can't have whichever players Brazil are able to get released. No, they can have Brazil. So that's interesting. They wouldn't have come in without it, I don't think. The other thing is that I think they tried. I mean, you're the sports marketing guy, but I think they tried first with basketball. You might have liked it, but you had no access to it because it just did not exist. The sporting landscape in our country was football in the winter, cricket in the summer. What else you got? You've got boxing. You got athletics. You got the two codes of rugby for the very distinct people who follow those two codes of rugby. Formula One, which is strong in England. You haven't got a great deal else, But basketball just didn't figure at all. Well, Nike, I think, ran into that and realised that if we're really going to be global players, we got to be into football, because that's the one. They did their research and they realised that Brazil was everyone's second favourite team. I think more than now, and in a way, I think Nike are part of that.
Yeah. It's remarkable. That deal in '98 was significant, huge deal. I think they maybe did it just before the '98 World Cup.
Yeah,
and obviously
96. So it's kind of happening in '96, in the build up to the World Cup in '98.
Yeah. And the famous advert in 1998, I think it was Ang Lee, was it, who directed it? The airport, Ronaldo and Romário and all those players, Denilson. I think today, people, if you say, what's your favourite World Cup ad, people of a certain age, people who remember that will always say that one. And actually, Nike have never been World Cup sponsors. So actually, it's a remarkable bit of ambush advertising as well, if you like.
Yes, and everyone remembers that one, and it was tailor made for a global. Even the musical soundtrack that they chose was Mais Que Nada. It was Brazilian music at its most international because it's a groove, had that World Cup been played in an airport lounge, I think Brazil might have won it. But on the football field,
Ronaldo still hits the post at the end. Unfortunately, he just hits the post at the end, which kind of is foreshadowing what would happen to him in the tournament a little bit. Tim, just moving to the present day, a Brazilian born the day Brazil lifted the trophy in Yokohama in 2002 is now going to be 23 years old. So they've watched Brazil go out in the quarters in 2006, the quarters in 2010, as you say, always European opposition.
Yeah.
The traumatic semi-final, a 7-1 loss against Germany at home, the quarters in 2018, on penalties to Croatia in 2022. So you've got these young fans, they've never in a footballing sense known what their parents knew, what the rest of us know. What does that do to a country whose self-image is all built on winning?
Yeah, indeed. It's a birthright being taken away. It's a little bit like, and the Ballon d'Or is similar. Because once that was opened up to like non-European players and so on, for a while it was like a Brazilian birthright. It was more or less only Brazilians who won it, and it's been years and years and years now. So these things are being taken away from them. What it does, I think, is it creates a distance between the national team and the public. Now that distance is already potentially there because so many of them play abroad. It's not a huge problem when they're massive global celebrities and they're winning, but when they're not winning, it becomes a problem. So there's a distance there. There's something I love that Brazilian society does every 4 years, which is decorate its streets for the World Cup. It's like a jubilee, but the royalty are like normal kids coming from normal streets. I think it's fabulous. All kind of the bunting and the street paintings and so on. I think it's a great tradition. It's losing a little bit now. It's not as big as it was. In some ways, that reflects some positive trends. Society, I think, has become more mature. There's not quite as much riding on it as there used to be. I think that's probably a good thing. The more negative thing is this distance between the team and the fans. And Brazilian fans, they've got to switch off. If the team's not winning, then this refers to club sides as well. It's not my representative. It's not my team. They can be very, very fickle supporters in that respect. So there's some of that as well. So at the moment, it's absolutely normal to hear people say, "Oh yeah, I'm not really into it. I'm into my club side. I'm not really into it." Come the World Cup, everyone will be into it. But the build-up at the moment seems less intense than in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, the greats of Brazil, obviously Pelé, Garrincha, Rivellino, Romário, Ronaldo. I mean, so many iconic footballers. What does the Brazilian father say to the Brazilian son about these players? You know, when all they've seen is players who are not quite at that level, and a load of heartbreak.
It's one of the reasons for the 7-1. You know, and you could play that you could play that game between Brazil and Germany in any other condition. You could play it 100 times, and Germany would win. I think the majority of times, and they were better. But you take it outside the pressures of the World Cup, it never happens again. Never, because it's a lot of tradition to live up to, and you are being told that you're not good enough to live up to that tradition. On 2002 is an interesting story because their qualification for that tournament was very ropey. It's really ropey. And Ronaldo didn't play at all in qualification because he was injured the whole time. Ronaldinho hardly played. Rivaldo had to carry the team on his own and really didn't like it. He threatened to retire from international football at one point. Why was that? Because the fans in Sao Paulo were just going at him the whole time. What happened for that World Cup 2002 was that every country had to name one host city to stage all its games. That was to stop a situation that had happened before where Brazil had tried to persuade opponents who played altitude not to play at altitude. So in order to stop Brazil buying it, you know, if one country goes up the mountain at La Paz to play Bolivia, everyone has to go. So the countries were restricted to one host city. Brazil, because of its size, was allowed two. And they chose Rio and Sao Paulo, the traditional centres. And it was a mistake. Because these are the people who grew up either watching or hearing about Pelé, Garrincha, right, and so on. You know, it's exactly where the fans are most demanding. And I remember the second home game, it was the first one in Rio. They got an iffy late penalty that gave them a draw against Uruguay. And the coach there, it was Vanderlei Luxembourg at the time, he was saying, you know, in the post-match press conference, he was saying all the players are saying, we don't want to play here anymore. It's too much. It's too much. And the coach, he told him, well, we got to. That's the regulations. One of the stories in Brazil qualifying for that World Cup is they used an energy crisis, an electricity crisis, to get away. The last three home games, they were able to play in smaller cities to break the terms of the qualification campaign, and they won those last three home games, and that's what's got them over the line. And the idea was, we get away from these traditional centres where the fans have grown up on these great players, where the fans don't see football of this calibre so often. Those fans will be more tolerant with us, and they'll help us rather than yelling abuse at us. Tough crowd.
The CONMEBOL, the CONMEBOL qualifying process is probably the toughest in world football, isn't it? I think in terms of
there's a lot of places.
The level.
Yeah, there's a lot of places, but in terms of the level of the game, yes, because there's no such thing as an easy away match. So it's very, very different from the European qualifiers in that sense. The European qualifiers, quite often, they bear almost no relation to World Cups at all. Right. So, so easy.
Liechtenstein, Latvia,
exactly.
San Marino.
Yeah.
You've got no equivalent of that. Yeah.
None at all. So, in Venezuela, the only country that have never been to a World Cup, but they're going to get there sooner or later. Venezuela, they've beaten pretty much everyone in qualification. They haven't beaten Brazil in qualification yet, but they've drawn with them. They've drawn with them in Brazil in qualification, and they've beaten them in a friendly. But they can do anyone. They've done everyone else. So there's no such thing as an easy away game. It is a slog. It's been great for the less since it came. It was exactly 30 years ago that this came in, together with that international calendar, which is so important. Because without that, there's no Nike. Because without that, they can't. They can't have full strength Brazil. And since it's been an absolute revolution for the lesser nations. In South America, almost all of whom have produced their best World Cup their best performance in a World Cup after that came in 30 years ago. But it can make it hard for the big two, for Brazil and Argentina, because every defeat is a mini crisis.
Yeah. It doesn't look like Neymar's gonna make it. and he probably represents the last kind of great redemption figure for Brazil. If you look at the current squad, Vinicius, Rafinha, Endrick, do you think there's anyone there who has that potential? Is anyone looking to any of those players, or is the idea of a single redemption figure kind of outdated now for Brazil?
Yeah, I wouldn't. We are speaking here. This is Monday the 27th, the day that we're recording this. This is the vital week for Neymar. He's got a couple of big games coming up this week.
Mm-hmm.
If he can turn on the tap, if he can find it this week, he gets himself back in the conversation. Single redemption figure? No, I don't think so. Not even Vinny, who's got his World Player of the Year award and all the rest of it. And maybe the one to watch is Estevão, although he's now an injury doubt, and that's the problem. That's the problem. But at least time is on his side. He's only he's 18, 19. So he'll have plenty of future World Cups. But I do hope that he gets him. It's a little bit like Pelé in '58 when he picked up an injury, and there was talk that he wouldn't be able to make it. And the staff, in the end, they decided, if we work round the clock with him, because of his age, he might be able to do it. And he was all right from the third game onwards. So given the fact that Ancelotti has 26, he might well cut Estevão some slack to see if he can play the final stages.
Yeah, very exciting young player. Going back to the marketing element of it, and obviously we mentioned Nike. Jogo Bonito is that phrase that belongs as much to Nike, I'd say, as Brazil. But they have really helped to popularize this sense of, joy in football. Is it a marketing ghost now, do you think, based on how Brazil plays now? Obviously, you've got this great pragmatist in Ancelotti in charge now. Would that be accurate to continue banding around Jogo Bonito?
It's never been a phrase in Brazil. This doesn't really. This exists for the international audience. The phrase that's used in Brazil that comes closest is futebol arte, football art, and 82, the failure of that team to win the World Cup or even qualify for the last four is usually identified as the death of futebol arte. The counter position to futebol arte is futebol força, football of strength. Mm-hmm. It's possibly there is a falsity in this division, because when look at Pelé, and Pelé is both art and incredible strength as well. But you know what they're getting at, and maybe, and this is something that Nike would have to think about. Maybe they oversold their products a little bit, and maybe that created something of a backlash, because in the years subsequent to 82, and there is a purely Brazilian dynamic to this, and quite often, even in Brazil, they will hang this hat on, we're just producing players for Europe, and that's why our characteristics have changed. There's a bit of laziness in that thinking. The characteristics were changing in the 80s anyway. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that had to do with, a lot of the people in Brazilian football are very technocratic. Very technocratic. I mean, they're very, very good at physical preparation and so on. Very, very good at the numbers and the data. And they came to the conclusion, this was a little bit Holland, after getting a maul in from Holland in 74, that the physical evolution of the game meant that Mexico 70 football was impossible. There is no longer the space on the field to play Mexico 70 football. So what we have to do is bulk up. We have to match the Europeans in physical terms. The midfield will be a battleground, and we will win the game with fast breaks down the flanks. Hence the attacking fullbacks, the kind of Cafu and Roberto Carlos. And that's the way that a lot of Brazilian football went. The domestic dynamic was, and this was identified in the 80s, that the job security for the coaches was so poor that a lot of the coaches were just pragmatists who were looking to cover up and defend and use the midfield as a battleground rather than a ground in which to create. So that there was this, and this was even true about 2002 when they won. And they won with that fabulous front three of Ronaldo, Rivaldo, and Ronaldinho. Even then, the general feeling worldwide was, yeah, well, they were very good with some great moments, but they weren't anything like Brazil of 1970. And the Guardiola revolution at Barcelona took them totally by surprise. You know, this tiny little midfielders just running rings around everyone. They thought that wasn't possible anymore. And it really took Brazilian football by surprise, and they haven't really recovered in the sense that they haven't really produced those kind of players for a long time now. And so that's why I think they're maybe more in danger of losing that kind of spiritual home of football tag now than they were in 1994, when it was also 24 years without. There's a lot of resentment against Spain, perhaps because of this. You know, Spain have like taken that mantle away from them, and it's Spain that you look at to see nicely constructed passing football, although without the individual genius with which Brazil rounded the whole thing off. So, but the main thing here, the thing that's more important than anything else, is always winning. You know, how you win is a little bit secondary, but most would prefer to win ugly rather than lose beautiful.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I was also thinking about Real Madrid and Barcelona as well, two teams that still try and follow the identity of what Guardiola did at Barcelona, and similarly with Spain, with the tiki-taka and the pressing, and Ancelotti being the man who built the kind of modern Real Madrid blueprint of, you know, win at all costs, a team that's never really cared too much about having an identity or entertaining anyone particularly in a systemic way, but to have the stars to excite. So in that sense, is he the perfect manager for Brazil, apart from his passport?
I think he probably is, yeah, because he's got so little time. You know, he's just come in with a few games, and I think it helps enormously that he's not a philosopher with an idea that he wants to impose. When he says very, very openly, I don't want my teams to have an identity. No, then the opposition knows what we're trying to do, and it's easier for them to stop us. I want my team to be able to react to different circumstances and play different ways, even inside the same game. That's what I want. And it's fascinating that the game before he took over, the game that made the foreign coach an inevitability, was they lost just over a year ago. They lost 4-1 to Argentina in World Cup qualification. And as a performance, it was worse than the 7-1. It was a shambles, an absolute shambles. And what they'd done there was they'd gone with 4 up front. How's Ancelotti been looking to play? The same way, 4 up front. And I spoke to him the day he was appointed, and I asked him about that Argentina game, and he said, yeah, no balance. The side had no balance. We've got some talent there, but no balance. So he is trying to balance out the same formation. So he hasn't brought in a new blueprint or anything like that. He's had a look. What have we got that's good, that's really, really good? And these days it's wingers. You know, Brazil's got more wide strikers than it knows what to do with. So he has set up to play his side with 2 wingers and a front pair. They've got to come back in order for this to work. And one of the things he's been stressing is, I don't want any of my players to go to the World Cup thinking of winning Ballon d'Ors, because we can't afford it. You know, if this is going to work, everyone's going to have to sacrifice. Everyone's going to have to work back. Now, a key question going into the World Cup is, will they be able to do this, play this way, in conditions of extreme heat? And the formation worked very well, for example, against Senegal in a game at the Arsenal Stadium in November. But the World Cup's not been played in London in November, you know. So can you do this formation, leaving only 2 in the central midfield, when one of them is Casemiro, who's 34?
Yeah, I was going to say one of them is getting on a bit. Yeah,
indeed. And it could well be that the injury to Esteban will allow for a rethink. Because one of the things, you look at the team, one of the things he could clearly do there is push Rafinha back to the right wing and then bring in an extra man in midfield. And then he's got 3 in midfield, and he's a little bit more covered up. And it wouldn't surprise me if that was going to be something that was going to happen during the course of the World Cup anyway. But we're going to have a lot of fun finding out. But yes, I think he is a good fit because he's not trying to impose anything. He's not trying to make them be something that they're not. Works extremely well with Brazilian players, has boundless credibility. But this initial idea is very, very different from the team that won in extreme heat in USA 94, which was a side that packed the midfield. And although they were a possession-based side, they were quite a cautious side. You know, the two strikers were kind of left to their own devices. But that was before Brazil was producing the wingers. Now the best thing that they produce is wingers. And so Ancelotti, as he does, how can I bend what I do to what I've got? And if what I've got is these wingers, we're going to go with these wingers.
Yeah. I remember that tournament very well. I watched it religiously as a young man, and I loved that Brazil team. I loved Romário and Bebeto in particular. But there was a point in the tournament, I think, where Rai came out of the team and Dunga came in. Was that right? And it became a more pragmatic 11?
Dunga was always in.
Yeah. Rai was dropped, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a captain. And they dropped him. And they knew they were going to drop him. I know the coach. And he told me this. He said, I knew that it wasn't going to last. When they changed formation, because he was like a 10, and they changed formation to a more orthodox 4-4-2 and put him wide, and he didn't have the pace for wide. So that was never going to work. So they gave him a couple of games, and you know when he got serious, out he came, and they brought in Mazinho, who was an all-round midfielder, but he was originally a left back, and it's all there in Mundiales, written by myself and Mark Biram. It was the more conservative of the three possible choices that they had to replace him. But what they were looking to do was balance the side out to play in the extreme heat. So it'll be interesting to see. And Ancelotti was there. He was assistant coach of Italy. You know, so he played Brazil in the final. And so he knows all about the conditions. I mean, if you remember that World Cup, one of the biggest shocks I've ever seen was the Italian captain Baresi coming out for the final. He'd had an operation, a minor operation, but he'd had a knee op during the tournament. And here he is coming out to face Romário. Not a chance. What happened? He put Romário in his pocket. And a few years ago, I saw the two coaches together and they were talking about it. And they were talking about Baresi getting the better of Romário. And the conclusion that they both came to, in the inhumane conditions of extreme heat, it was better to be injured than to be tired. It's one of the great injustices, really, that Baresi and Badju, who was carrying a knock, they're the two who sky the penalties over the bar. You know, it's very, very cruel on them after forcing weary bodies through 120 minutes. Yes, so who adapts to the conditions best is going to be a key part, I think, in this World Cup. And whether Brazil can do it in the hard, the knockout, there's an extra knockout game now with all of that jeopardy, whether they can really do it playing four up front, we will see. Or maybe we won't, because maybe he will revert to three in midfield.
Yeah. So you're expecting more attritional football, more extreme heat, more humidity. Which South American side is going to thrive in that environment, do you think?
Well, remembering that last time around, and I think there might have been one air-conditioned stadium last time around. Last time around, in the conditions of extreme heat, the final four, as well as Brazil, were Italy, Sweden and Bulgaria. So it isn't necessarily the case that the South Americans, especially because it is winter in South America, and June and July in, say, Argentina and Uruguay, it's really cold. Argentina passed the ball around beautifully. Lovely side to watch, passing the ball around. You worry about the defensive unit with them. It's the same defensive unit as last time around, as Qatar, which nearly collapsed game after game. With an extra knockout round, you think, surely this is a bridge too far. But they're very attractive. Ecuador are interesting because they don't concede. They don't score goals. They're 17 games unbeaten. They've only won 6 of them. They don't score, but they don't concede. And this is a World Cup, which, again, back to 1994, Jack Charlton style, you can win without scoring a goal. 0-0 and then 0-0. So I'm expecting attritional football for 2 reasons. Firstly, the heat. I think heat calls for cautious football. Donadoni said at half-time in the World Cup final in '94, he said to Arrigo Sacchi, coach, he said, "Coach, if we go forward, we're not coming back." So the extreme heat, I think, leads to cautious football and the regulations where, as I say, you don't have to win a game to win the World Cup. So I fear that it's not going to be a patch on Qatar. We're not going to get a final like we did in Qatar. And I wonder, and here I ping the ball back to you, I wonder from the point of view of brand, the point of view of marketing, if this is a real problem for the World Cup, and bearing in mind that the next one, there are 3 games ludicrously in the South American winter, and then the rest of it, high summer, is Spain, Portugal and Morocco, high summer. At the end of the season, I wonder whether the World Cup will end up weakening its power as a brand, and there will be pushes to stage it at another time in the year.
Yeah, such an interesting provocation. Thanks for asking me a question, Tim. That's very nice of you. You know my area, so I think my position has always been on the World Cup is it's almost too big to fail. It's the greatest show on earth. You could put it on the moon, somehow it would become this great televisual spectacle. You've got the best players, you've got the heritage, you've got the history of it, and it has been played in all kinds of conditions. Like Qatar, when they won that bid, I was there reporting on it, and everyone was like, how is this going to happen? How is this possible? Surely this is the beginning of the end for the FIFA World Cup. So I think they will find a way. I think football always finds a way. I think top footballers and top managers will find a way. I suspect there will be some attritional games, as you say. We saw that in 1994, but we also saw record crowds in 1994, and we also saw the roots of the MLS, which is a successful league by lots of measures as well. So I do expect that we're not going to get the final that we got in Qatar, certainly. I don't know if we'll ever get a final like that again. It was unbelievable. But I think we're going to get some incredible moments. It's the World Cup.
Do you think that long term, FIFA might think about ways to move it to, all right, if December or something like Qatar is not great in a lot of parts of the world, moving it to April might make a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course they did December for Qatar and it worked. So there is a test case now, there's precedent now. The football calendar has shown that it can work around this. So I can absolutely see that happening again. I think you've got Saudi Arabia as the next hosts. I don't think they've announced dates yet, but I don't think you can do that in July and August in Saudi Arabia. So almost certainly they're going to have to move that to another time of the year. So let's stick to marketing, actually. I'd love to ask you this question, Tim. This is going to be the most lucrative World Cup ever staged, of course, in the USA and Canada and Mexico. But the USA is really the home of sports marketing and commerce and capitalism, as we know. It's the most important sports market on earth, really. Brazil's commercial weight, the shirt, the brand, the players is still colossal. It's still massive. Do you think there's a gap between Brazil's commercial power and its footballing power as well? And do you think we'll see that gap? Do you think people are expecting something that maybe won't be delivered on the pitch from Brazil?
Which I think then in turn generates a backlash against the marketing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've seen this since '98. Because I think Nike came in perhaps with an idea from basketball of the dream team, and it never was. I don't get the impression that Brazil are everyone's second favourite team to the extent that they used to be, and part of that I think is a backlash to being sold something that they're not seeing anymore. There are other factors as well in terms of the way that, even just let's take a relatively minor thing, like the dancing that they'll do after to celebrate scoring a goal. A lot of people, especially older people, don't like it. And the Brazilian response in the last World Cup was, "Oh, well, this is just part of our culture. This is." And the older one will say, well, hang on a minute. But I watched all these great sides in the past. They didn't do it. It's so, always this measure of 1970, and it's always that they're falling short even when they win. The amount of diving that goes on. Again, people look at we didn't really do that much of that, everyone remembers. It's such a tiny little insignificant moment. Everyone remembers it. The game against Turkey in 2002, when trying to get Rivaldo to hurry up with the game, they blast the ball over to him to take a corner, and it hits him in the shin, and he falls down clutching his head. Everyone remembers that, and it soils the kind of purity that is trying to be sold. And I don't know, as a marketing person, I don't know how you get out of that one. I don't know. Because just by pulling on the shirt, there's an expectation of 1970 and then a disappointment when in a number of different ways it doesn't live up to that.
Yeah. I think you have to believe, and I think Brazil is just such an enduring symbol. And I think as much as 1950, the shadow of 1950 looms over Brazil, so does the shadow of 1970, as you say, and the expectations that have come with playing this wonderful, entertaining brand of football, which everyone still talks about. But I think it's still a country that produces extraordinary talents as well.
Yeah.
Vinicius, Rafinha, there is still so much talent. Estivao is so exciting, as we said as well, that you're almost always looking for that moment of brilliance. I mean, even Richarlison scored an absolute worldie, didn't he, in 2022 with that overhead kick? Yeah. And you're a Tottenham fan, so that's not par for the course from him. So,
isn't it bizarre how it's just a moment? Because 54, for example, they get involved in another battle, just as they did in 38. A battle, and there's punches flying over, and the Battle of Bern against the Hungarian side. And the Daily Mail, not natural allies of then Hungary, the Daily Mail say that, maybe Brazil should be kicked out of future World Cups if this is what they're going to be like. So at that point, the association is with talent, but also with
animals is what they used to say, right?
Yeah. And then, but just 1970 kind of immortalizes the version of absolute sporting purity. And to live in the shadow of that is not easy.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you fast forward now to July 19th, imagine a scenario, Brazil wins this. What changes in the country? What does this mean for the country that hasn't seen success in 24 years?
Massive boost of self-esteem. And look what happened after 1994. They won they got to 3 finals in a row, It was a huge boost of self-esteem, which I think you'd see something like that again. It's a very, very manic depressive sports culture. Very. It's, we've got no chance. We're rubbish. We're unstoppable. We're brilliant. No one can live with us. Often in the course of the same tournament, it can oscillate between those two things. It would be Ancelotti's triumph as well. It would, and most of the good work that's happened in domestic Brazilian football recently has been from foreign coaches, especially Portuguese. So in the way that the victories between 58 and 70 were seen as an alliance between the white Pelé and the black Pelé. And the white Pelé was Havelange. And Havelange stood for Brazil's going through an economic boom. And Havelange stood for the technocratic class, organising things and preparing the stage for the black Pelé, representing the mass of the population, to come in and do what he did. I think you would get something similar, but not in societal terms, just in football terms. Ancelotti as this wise figure, unlocking the key for our players to show the potential that's been there all along. So I think it would be something similar, but something that would speak more about football than about society, as was the case in the Havelange Pelé years.
Yeah. Pelé does feature very heavily in the book, as you said at the start. He's almost the heart of the book, or the center of the book, in terms of the different eras. Where would you put Pelé in terms of his significance as a 20th century figure, alongside the likes of Muhammad Ali and Diego Maradona and others, in terms of not just what he delivered on the pitch, but what he stood for off the pitch as well?
It's a great question. And Pelé himself was asked something similar. He was asked, where do you rank yourself with these 1960s idols? And he was very emphatic, always talking about himself in the third person. Pelé's bigger than all of them. And the rationale was that the message of Pelé was restricted to sport. So he's not involved in like drugs like the Beatles. He's not involved in politics like Ali or Martin Luther King. And it's obviously the opinion of someone who spent too long being surrounded with an entourage, agreeing with everything that he said. The comparison with Ali and Martin Luther King, I think, was very, very unfortunate. Not least because there were times when Pelé entered when he thought it was safe to do so. He entered the political arena. He came out against the military dictatorship at a time when there was a consensus that the military dictatorship had been a bad thing. What Ali did to give up the best years of his career on a point of principle. What Martin Luther King did, knowing that he was likely to lose his life for a cause. You don't find that kind of greatness in Pelé. So, but I wouldn't expect that of anyone. I mean, it's that's the extraordinary greatness of Ali. I'm very, very happy that the day I was born was the first time he fought as Muhammad Ali. The rematch against Sonny Liston when he floors him in the first with the so-called phantom punch. That's the day I was born. Very, very happy with that.
Incredible.
I always loved him. Yeah. So you don't find that kind of individual quality in Pelé. I think possibly until the very last years of his life, he suffered deep trauma with childhood poverty, and always thought it could come back. And I think that's one of the things that drove him on throughout his life, and led him sometimes into areas that he probably shouldn't have gone down. So he lacks that absolute colossal quality that transcends his sport in a way that Ali did. But you said, the World Cup is almost failure proof because it is the event, and he did more than anyone else to turn it into that event, because his career coincides with the start of the World Cup as a TV event, the start of that habit of the planet sitting down. So the World Cup, in many ways, it's the house that he built. And the number, I've never seen anyone apart from myself talk about this on Brazilian TV, but the number that I think which is a story in itself, the number that I think has the biggest impact when I think of Pelé is 52. He was born 52 years after Brazil ends slavery. Now, I'm old enough to know that ain't nothing. That's nothing, this kid who, he's surrounded by people with personal knowledge of enslavement, leaves the planet as the acclaimed king of the global game. And I think that's a fabulous story, which, as you're right, it's right at the heart of the book. So appropriate that his last conscious days on Earth were spent during the Qatar World Cup, during which Messi rises to the challenge of being a kind of Pelé figure for the 21st century.
Brilliant stuff. I could listen to you talk about Pelé for hours because I know you've got so much passion and knowledge there around the great man. I'm got a couple more questions just to bring us home now, Tim. Go back to Mundiales. It's co-written. It's with Mark Biram. It's been out for a couple of weeks now. What would you say? You said you read it, you reflected on it, you liked it. Yeah. Is there a line in there that you would really like a kind of European football fan to take away from it? Or a message?
Not a line. Yeah, I mean, I start the book with it, with the introduction. It's a phrase I've heard so often, even to its shame in Brazil, that the World Cup is like a European Championships with Brazil and Argentina. And that's so disrespectful to the history of this competition and to its future, because we're beginning to see African teams, and the biggest argument in favour of the expansion of the World Cup, which is unwieldy and does bring problems, but you could no longer contain African football in the number of places that it had in a 32-team World Cup. You couldn't. It was an injustice that was being done to African football. So I would like to knock on the head the idea that the World Cup is like a Euros, just with Brazil and Argentina. Everyone else,
Uruguay maybe shouldn't be discounted in terms of their heritage in the competition either, right?
Indeed, and one day, I mean, I fear a little bit for Colombia this year, but one day they can. And Colombia are the reigning under-17 champions in South America, after beating Brazil 3-0 in the semi-final and Argentina 4-0 in the final. Colombia one day, is a place to look. It's such a great way, football, of learning about the world. I've got a grandson who's 8, coming up 9. This is going to be his second World Cup, and just to see him learn about all these countries as a consequence of the World Cup is absolutely brilliant. It's great. He knows all about Arabia Saudita, Saudi Arabia, as they say, because of the World Cup. He's learnt all that, so the biggest lesson, I think, is just look beyond just Europe and Brazil and Argentina. There is a big wide world out there, full of tradition and full of potential.
Yeah. It's amazing what can inspire you when you're young. For me, the 1986 Panini Mexico 86 sticker album was absolutely, I was obsessed with that as a kid and swapping stickers, and I remember it vividly, It was brilliant. Final one for you, Tim. June the 13th, you mentioned African football and its rise. Brazil faced Morocco, semi-finalists last time out. I mean, there was a time where that on paper would have been, this is another 3-4-0 opening fixture for Brazil, but doesn't look that way now. Nothing is guaranteed now. Morocco are obviously a very good team with players who play in some of the top European teams. What do you think happens to Brazil in this tournament? How do you think they start it? Give us your predictions.
I have absolutely no idea, and that just makes it. And if I knew, what would be the point of watching it? And that just makes it all the more fascinating. And I was doing TV a couple of weeks ago, and the other fella on with me said, "Yeah, people are saying that we're even worried about Morocco. How can we be worried about Morocco?" And I was thinking, sorry, pal, world's moved on. World's moved on. It's one of my favourite things. I put it in the book that I'm fascinated with the early 70s, because my first World Cup was 74, just too young for 70. So the first World Cup game, I was just turned 9. It was Brazil-Yugoslavia. And my dad said, "You've got to see this. You've got to see this. And it was such a disappointment. A 0-0 draw, and Yugoslavia shaded it, really. And a few years ago, and that Brazil campaign ends where they were outclassed by the great Holland side, who beat them 2-0 in what's essentially the semi-final. And a few years ago, I found a pile of magazines from the early 70s. And in 72, Brazil are organising a mini World Cup. It's part of the campaign of Havelange to become FIFA president. He wants to get everyone over to Brazil. And a lot of nations are invited, and some turn up, but most refuse. And that particular week, Holland have refused. And the magazine says, Holland have just refused. Between ourselves, no one's going to miss Holland. And 2 years later, who is it who ends Brazil's reign? As the perils of being tradition snobs. Brazil lost to Cameroon in the last World Cup, and Cameroon were so happy to have become the first African nation to beat Brazil that they didn't even bother trying to get the second goal, which would ensure their qualification out of the group stage. They were just happy to go home and we won 1-0. We've beaten Brazil, Morocco have beaten Brazil subsequently to that. They beat Brazil last year in the under-20 World Cup. And they're unbeaten a long time. I know they lost at the start. They lost the AFCON final, but that was penalties. They're unbeaten a long time. I know they've just changed their coach, but what a fascinating game. I have no idea, absolutely no idea what's going to happen. I think Brazil can beat Haiti without too many problems, and Miami in the afternoon should be a bit hot for Scotland. So I can't see any problems qualifying from the group. And after that, it's the World Cup. If it was a league, I wouldn't fancy their chances too much. But it's a cup. And they've got a coach there who knows how to do it. And I certainly wouldn't rule them out. And I think we're gonna have a lot of fun finding out if they can end this 24-year dry run. So bring it on, even with all the problems of this World Cup, which is very problematic for a number of reasons. Bring it.
Yeah.
Let the games commence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think despite that 24-year drought of no World Cups, Brazil will still go there with that target on the back. People will still want to see Brazil. People will still mark it in the calendars. Oh, Brazil are playing Morocco. You always look out for Brazil's opening match. And I think the way you capture the story of Brazil amongst the other nations in your book really helps us understand why, right? So thank you so much for that, Tim, because you've captured it there. Tim, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. And is there any other parting messages you want to share? You've obviously given us the rallying cry. Bring it on. Let the games begin. Anything else you want us to look forward to this summer?
Well, I know what I want to look forward to. I think I might just be able to squeeze time for a little dip in the sea. And I want to see a turtle. Quite often when I go for a little in the sea, I see a little turtle putting his head above the water. I would love to see a little turtle. So that's my next rallying cry for me. Let's go for a little float in the sea, little dive in the sea, and let's hope there's a turtle there going by, putting his little head above the surface at the right moment.
Brilliant. Tim, you're the living embodiment of living the dream. So enjoy that. Hopefully you'll see your turtle, and here's to a great World Cup. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.